Hello and welcome back to Autism Unpacked. I'm Rosie Gill-Moss, I'm your host, and today we're going to be learning a little bit more about the EHCP process. An EHCP is an educational healthcare plan, and I've brought two experts in to help unpack the process, from understanding its purpose to the steps involved in obtaining one and what to do once you have it. My hope is that this episode will leave you feeling informed, empowered and ready to advocate for your child. So joining me today, I've got two expert guests. First of all, I've got Emma, who is the Managing Director of Options Autism. Welcome back, Emma. How are you?
Nice to be back, Rosie. I'm good, thank you.
So would you just tell us a little bit, just remind listeners who you are and what you do and what your involvement is within the HCP process? Would that be?
So I'm Emma and I'm the Managing Director for Options Autism. We've got a number of schools across the UK for autistic children and young people. And I started my career 20 years ago and working in the sector. In terms of EHCP process, Education Healthcare Plan, I'm not directly involved, but I have a lot of contact from parents trying to understand the process, understand how to navigate it, looking at where they can find support, etc.
Also joining me today, I've got Sarah Jo. Welcome to the podcast, Sarah Jo.
Hi, Rosie. Thank you for having me.
So would you tell our listeners a little bit about what your role is within Options Autism and what brought you to working with children with special needs?
So I've worked for Options Autism for the last 16 years. Previously, I was a nurse, and then my career changed slightly. I had my children and my parents were fostering at the time, and they had a foster child who broke down his placement, several school placements, and he was learning from home. So I decided to support him through his GCSEs. And the school he was with offered me a job to set up an alternative provision, which I did. And I found my calling and wanted to support him to get an EHCP so he would be able to succeed in his education, because he was a very bright lad.
And EHCPs, they've got a sort of almost golden ticket mythology around them now, haven't they, as being something that you must have and it guarantees your child a place in an appropriate provision. And actually, they're not meant to be that, are they? They're meant to almost be a guide to how this child needs support, what they respond well to, what they don't respond well to. As a legally binding document, an EHCP sets out the precise support a child requires. Here's what that means. So a really good starting point actually might be if I get Emma to just explain what an EHCP is, because there is so much miscommunication, misunderstanding around this document, which previously would have been called a statement.
So I think if I start at the beginning, all schools in England have to provide support for special educational needs children and young people. That's without fail, that's what they have to do. But they've only got limited budget and resources to do that. So if the support required to meet the needs of a child goes beyond what they can do, then that's where a child needs to be part of an EHCP process. So the EHCP is simply Education Healthcare Plan. It's a legally binding document that sets out in a number of sections what support that child needs in school. And because it's legally binding, once it's written, that has to happen.
And these, they can last until they're in their 20s?
25.
25. So this document, which could be issued as young as primary school, stays with them throughout their education into further education. And it's revisited roughly once a year, is that right?
Yep, and there's an annual review process that happens yearly to review them, just to make sure that the same requirements are there in terms of to support that child.
And we know, I've been through the EHC process with my son. I know that it's very, very complicated and very challenging, and often the parents will perhaps be neurodivergent themselves and they're faced with these reams and reams of paperwork, which can be very, very daunting. And I'm guessing that in your job, Sarah Jo, you will support parents navigating this process and helping them to understand what that means for them in terms of where their child can access schooling. Is that right?
Absolutely, Rosie. We would get calls from parents who are really distressed about where their child's going to go. You know, they feel like they're not getting any help. So we're really good at advising them if they're coming to us, because obviously coming to any of our provisions, they need to have an EHCP. So we would guide them to, every local authority would have a SENDAST, which is a Special Educational Needs and Disability Information Advisor. which is free, that they can use to help the process of an EHCP for them. There's also other independent ones like IPSI, which is the independent provider, special education advice as well. All of these people are able to support them with their journey through their EHCP.
It's a myth that every young person has to have a diagnosis of autism to have an EHCP. That's actually not the case. So, Sarah Jo, within your group of schools, the children would all have to have an EHCP in order to access the schools, but they don't always have to have a diagnosis of autism to get an EHCP. Is that right?
That's correct. There's a bit of a myth. People think that young people need to have a diagnosis to have an EHCP. An EHCP can be put in place if a child isn't meeting their milestones within school. So parents may flag it, the SENCO in their school may flag it in the sense that they're not reaching milestones, they're not progressing, and actually what can we do to help this child to progress? And this is where they would have a meeting with their SENCO and there'd be discussions around having an EHCP in place. So having a diagnosis isn't the only reason why you would have an EHCP.
Yeah, and actually my son, he received an EHCP before he had his formal diagnosis of autism because it was affecting his learning.
And it's also important to remember that not everybody with a diagnosis needs an EHCP as well.
So. No, quite right actually, because when I took in the diagnosis paperwork for my daughter, we had the discussion about would I be applying, putting on the SEN register, and actually no, not at the moment because she's doing really well. So but you can change your mind, can't you? If you haven't got an EHCP and you feel in the future they need one, it doesn't have to be done at the point of diagnosis either.
No, it can be from nursery. An EHCP can be put in place from a very early stage. I've just done a similar support with my great nephew who is 3 and starts school in September, and it was very clear he had autism and was non-verbal. And I've supported that process through his nursery to get his EHCP in place, ready for him to start his new school in September.
Moving on, let's talk through the key details about what's in an EHCP and who they are designed to support. So we've talked quite a bit about these EHCPs, or the educational healthcare plans. And I'm just wondering whether, Emma, it'd be worth you just explaining what they actually are, what's in them, who they're designed to support, and the kind of essential similarities and sections that you will find in an EHCP.
Okay, so firstly, it's a really extensive document. It goes from section A to section K, but I think it's good.
Won't make you go through them all.
No, we'll just focus on the key ones, which is A, B, F, and I. So section A outlines the views, interests, and aspirations of the child and young person. Sometimes that can get overlooked, but it's really important that those child's views, as we said earlier, are taken into account. So that's section A. Section B, probably one of the key parts as well, was what are the special educational needs that child has. So it might be that their primary need is autism, or it might be that it's social, emotional, mental health needs. So that outlines the need. And then section F is the provision. So what will be put in place? So when we talked earlier about what is that specific provision that needs to be put in place for that child to be able to achieve and be successful, that is all outlined in section F. So it could be that the child requires one-to-one support from a known adult several times a week. It could be that they require 3 sessions of speech and language therapy every week. There are a huge number of things that could be in there, but section F outlines what needs to be put in place.
And who would normally fill that in? Would that be the school?
So that would be the local authority when the EHCP plan is first issued, and they would look at information from, like we said before, the school, healthcare, parents, etc., specialist reports to put that together. So it's the local authority in the first instance that writes that EHCP.
And then the parents then have the opportunity to question, to alter, to add, take away anything from that?
When the EHCP is first issued in the draft, they have that opportunity to add anything at that point. Then obviously you have section I, which is the school. So that's the named school that young person will go to.
It's really simple to begin the journey to getting an EHCP. Let's find out what it involves.
Now, Emma, what would you say to parents at the moment who are contemplating embarking on the EHCP process? Because we all know that it is laborious, and there is no guarantee that you're going to get one at the end of it. Now, within the autistic parenting community, there's a lot of talk about how difficult it is to get them. Are you advising people to still go and try and get one? What should you do if during the process you're not issued one at the first hurdle, should we say?
I think so. For those parents who are considering getting one, if your needs aren't being met in that school, and additional resource has been put in and it's still not being met, then the first stage would be to have a conversation with the school teacher, class teacher, or the special educational needs coordinator, the SENCO, and obtain their view as well.
So Emma, let's assume that you have a child that you believe requires an EHCP, or they've had a diagnosis, and the next step you're thinking would be an EHCP or an educational healthcare plan. What do you do next? What's the process? Where do you begin with this?
Okay, so in order to apply for an education healthcare plan, it's really simple. It's simply a written request sent to a local authority, and that can be done by the parent. It can be done by a paediatrician. It can be done by the school as well, a social worker. It doesn't all sit with the parents, but they can request if they want to. And then the local authority have 6 weeks to get back to the parents to say, actually, we will complete the assessment or we won't complete the assessment. So that's the first hurdle sort of to get over there. So if they won't complete the assessment, you can obviously appeal that, and there's information on local authority websites how to do that. But if they do want to proceed with the assessment, then that is the point where they ask for a lot of information. The people they ask is from point A to H, to several people, but clinicians, parents, schools, healthcare, it goes on. And that's to gain the information about the child and to make that decision about whether an education healthcare plan is needed or not. But most importantly, they must ask the child for their views as well. And sometimes that can get missed. So it's really important that is the child's wishes and needs and views are put
And there is a
forward
section in the form, isn't there, called Child View,
Yes.
and a parent or care or teacher can help them fill that in if they're not able to.
Absolutely.
I think my son says that he loves his family apart from his sister, which is brilliant. That's on a legal document. Thank you. So, Sarah Jo, you would presumably then get involved at this point. Can you tell me a little bit more about what happens within the process? Just, a little.
I like to describe it as a car journey, a long car journey for parents. There's around 4 stops, but a few bumps in the road. The first being the application, where they need to get all the evidence, as Emma was explaining, from all the professionals and people that know the young person. And it's important for them to get their stationery sorted, so they've got everything filed away, and anything that comes back, they've got the information there ready. The second stop in the journey would be the draft. The draft would then come in, but the draft would come in and the parents might not be quite happy with that draft.
They can be quite negative, aren't they?
They can be, and miss vital points out within the draft. So they can go back and say, look, can we add this? Can we add that? You've missed this. I think this is really important, that this objective needs to state this. And then they will go through, once that's gone through, they would then send the final plan through.
It's important to look at every school that's available before arriving at a decision for your child. Here's why that is.
Once they've got the final plan through, the parents would need to sign that off and be happy with it. And once that happens, they are then able to look at naming a provision. Now, this can be quite difficult because I think a lot of parents don't realise that local authorities will send your child's plan out to lots of mainstream provisions and maintain specialist schools before, if a parent has requested a certain school, they will still send it out to lots of other schools. But my advice would always be to parents, look at every school, go to every single school, never listen to what other people say about certain schools, make your own decisions on that. Because how successful your child is might be just through the children that they're with in their class or the teachers that they have. So I think it's really important. I stress that very much to parents. They go, I don't want my child going to this school.
Yeah.
And I go, please just go and have a look. So then you've got a case. So I'd say to any parent listening that, you know, look at every single school.
I was actually given that advice as well, that I should go and visit every potential school in the area, because like you say, you hear rumours or anecdotal evidence about schools, and you need to go and see them yourself. And the common theme I'm hearing is about knowledge and being informed. And I was advised to take a piece of paper with the requirements in the EHCP and make sure that the school can meet each and every single one of them, because that is your right as a parent.
Absolutely.
That is your right, and you need to go and see these schools and have a feel for them. And it's a bit sort of a bit wishy-washy, but you get a feel for where your child is going to thrive. And you know, I think as parents, we know quite quickly whether it's the right placement for them. My son's been in 4 primary schools, so obviously my intuition is not that great, but he is now in the right setting. And it's quite scary to move a child as well, especially an autistic child. But I think that to get them into the right place, sometimes that's what you have to do.
You talked about the clipboard and having the EHCP there, and there's one key section of the EHCP, section F, which outlines the provision that should be in place for that child. So actually going to all of the schools and saying, well, can you meet this provision, is actually a really good way of seeing whether actually that school is suitable or not, and actually hearing from them if they'll be able to meet the needs. So I really like that.
Yeah, and I'd always say take a couple of highlighter pens so you can highlight the goods and the bads with it. And it just, you can then remember there's so much to take in. And also with what your child says as well. I mean, I'm always very cautious about children coming to visit a provision, and I always request to parents, I feel it's better for you to come first, see what you think, because I don't want to give false hope, because so many children have been let down in their education. It's important to get it right, and I think for the parents, for the first instance, to come and have a look is really important.
And I think there's an element of taking back control, you know, of knowing that as a parent you do have a say in where your child goes to school. And I think the common misconception is that the local authority will allocate a school, that's where your child goes. And parents don't realise that they have the power and the autonomy to change that. So say, for example, I'm going to use an imaginary child. My son has been allocated a place in a mainstream secondary school. He has a diagnosis of autism and an EHCP. I don't believe that the mainstream school can meet need. What can I do?
So firstly, I think it's important to reiterate rights and parents' rights here. So the Special Educational Needs Code of Practice, which came out in 2014, which was the start of the EHCPs, states very clearly that parental preference for the school that their child goes to must be considered and must be actually given unless they can demonstrate that another school can meet the needs better or equally for less money. Usually unfortunately sometimes it does come down to money. So it's about knowing your rights. You have the right as a parent to state the school that you want your child to go to.
And I think it's quite challenging sometimes as the parent of a son with special needs to go and push for that higher funding, because there is an element of, why him, why us, why should we be eligible? But I think the bigger question is why not? And there are specialist provisions. There are brilliant, amazing, maintained and mainstream provisions. But I think being aware of what is on offer in your area and what's available means that, because I didn't know the school that my son goes to existed. I didn't know it was there. As soon as I found it, I was delighted. But inform yourself on what's available in your area, I think, is a really key thing.
And Google's really good for that. Google's really good for that, around schools in your area, around support, around support groups, parent forums. Google is amazing. And lots of stationery with those highlighting pens.
You're talking to the stationery nerd in me now.
It's possible to challenge the decision if you feel your child isn't being offered the right provision. Let's find out more.
Okay, so now let's say that we have a situation where a child has either been diagnosed with autism or the parent highly suspects and they've gone to get an EHCP and it has been rejected at the first hurdle. You mentioned there that you can appeal. What happens then? Sarah Jo, do you want to answer that one?
So what you would do, you would request your SEND caseworker that you want to appeal and object to what they're saying. This would then go to a tribunal, which is obviously a legal representative, which is normally a judge in an informal court, and it can be someone from the school that they're currently at. There'll be a legal professional and the parent within that tribunal process. They would look at all the evidence. So again, where we spoke about earlier around evidence and keeping that evidence safe and making sure it's at hand, it's really important.
This is where your highlighted sheets
This is
come
really
in.
your highlighting sheets come in massively, because it is about the evidence base and the need of why your child needs to go to this school and the impact that will be if they don't go to this school,
And that's
the
really
detriment of their learning if they go to another provision.
And I think some people can be quite anxious about tribunal. It's like, it's a big
scary.
word. It's scary at tribunal, but just to reassure parents, it usually lasts for a day, no longer. The child doesn't need to go if they're under the age of 16. But if you do have a clinical psychologist or someone else that's advocating for the child, they can also come and present their evidence as well, in terms of why a different school needs to be named or why actually they should be issued an EHCP.
Just a quick question. If you're a parent and you're looking at tribunal, does it cost you anything? Do you have to pay?
No. It doesn't. It's all free. Some parents, if they lose their tribunals and they really believe this is the right provision for them, they can then go and get private legal advice and pay for it.
So the biggest reason for rejection, the biggest reason for the no, you can't go to that school, is money. So you have to prove that it's good use of public money for the child to attend that provision.
Which is really, really horrible as a parent to have to give your child a sort of monetary value and, argue that you believe your child is eligible for this funding, whereas somebody else might not be. It can create almost a bit of tension, I guess, in between parents of autistic children. Well, how come they've got funding? How come they haven't got funding?
And I think it's also frustrating that there is a lack of provisions as well. Following on from what you said, Emma, regarding LAs regarding funding, it's also capacity as well. So if a school's at full capacity, we can't take the child forward, but the parent could still go to tribunal and say, well, my child needs to go to that school, even though it's at full capacity. And that can be really difficult because obviously we like to have the smaller provisions, we like to have the smaller classes, and it's really impactful if our class sizes are bigger.
Well, a lot of the magic is because of the class sizes being small, isn't it?
Absolutely. So that can be really difficult because we can meet the need, but we can't meet it within the space, within the provisions. And that happens a lot for parents as well, which is really frustrating.
And as Sarah Jo talked about earlier, sometimes a school can be put in there that a parent isn't happy with, and then the appeal tribunal process would start.
You've been through the process and obtained your EHCP. Now to discover what the next steps involve.
Emma, once you have received your EHCP and you're delighted with it and it's all signed off, rubber stamped, you've got your placement, everything's going really, really smoothly, what happens next?
So the EHCP has to be reviewed annually in an annual review, that's what it's called. And invited to that annual review, it would be the local authority, members from the school and the parents. There might be some clinicians there as well. It really depends on the child. And that's where all of the EHCP is reviewed. The provision is reviewed to see if that's still needed. And the outcome section is also reviewed. And that's where it says, has that young person achieved those outcomes? And what happens from then is either the EHCP remains in place and continue as normal and keep going. If all of the outcomes are met, which is very unlikely after 1 year, but if that happens, then there could be the ending of an EHCP if it was felt it was no longer needed. So there's those two things that happen, but majority of the time it's continues to the next year and another annual review process happens. What is important though is there are certain periods in a school year that the naming of the school in section I needs to be looked at again, and Sarah Jo's the expert on that piece. So
we do get a lot of parents that will make contact with us around when the child's in year 5, and that's a good time to start looking for that next transition to secondary school. So we would advise that they can have interim reviews as well. So they have annual reviews. You can have emergency reviews as well if you feel that the plan's not right or we need to change a placement. But an interim review can be put in place as well if you feel, actually, I want to change to this school. So year 5 is a really good time to do that.
And that would be because parents are thinking about secondary and transition into year 7.
Yeah.
And we do know that the difference between outcomes for autistic children in primary and secondary are vastly different, aren't
Massively different.
So
absolutely.
A child that might be, surviving and doing all right at primary school, when they go to secondary, you could see kind of a great unraveling.
We do find that some children are coming from a mainstream primary school into our specialist provisions. So I think it's really important to have that plan mapped out for them, because there's always the car journey again, bumps in the road. So it's really important for us to work together with them and the local authority about, is this the right provision for them? And parents knowing that if their child is at a specialist school as well, that if they are moving into year 7, they still need to let the local authority know that they're happy to continue at that provision. Because if you don't, they can start sending your child's plan to other provisions to see whether they can meet need. So it's really important that parents in year 5 are looking at the annual review to say that they want this provision for their year 7 placement. And that's the same with year 11 for sixth form or college as well. There is that issue as well. You have to make sure that you are having those conversations, but your school should be helping you with that. The SENCOs will be working with that as well, about what the next steps are, because there is always those steps, and those steps are really important, that they're right steps for your child.
One thing I would like to just ask you a little bit more, and you talked about the outcomes and the expectations on within the EHCP. So if a child is being really well supported, I'm going to use my hypothetical child again. So say they're in one of your schools, they are doing incredibly well, their emotional regulation is really under control, they're meeting their academic milestones. They're doing that because of all the scaffolding and support that's in place. So presumably the local authority are not going to look at it and say, they're doing really well, we're going to pull the funding in the EHCP from. How do you mitigate that happening?
Evidence again. Yeah. It's making sure the school staff, the clinical staff, and making sure the evidence is there with their IEPs, individual educational provision maps they have at the school, so they can see that by having this support, they're making these progresses. If this support was taken, those progresses might not continue. So it's important about
scary,
evidence.
Isn't it? You think, well, they're doing so well, but if I tell the local authority, will it be taken away? But that's not the case. You need to just be able to evidence
be really transparent with the local authority around it.
And the outcomes will usually be things that are based on independence as well.
Yeah.
So it will be being able to do something independently. So if you've still got one-to-one support in place, then they're not yet independent. And they tend to focus on a whole key stage, not just a yearly process.
Thank you, because I think that is something that worries parents, is they're making such good progress, will they lose the support that they're getting?
And I think some parents as well worry about whether they can start a specialist school at secondary or starting in primary. A child can move provision at any time. If you don't feel that the current school isn't meeting their needs, you can request for your child to move schools as well. We
called an emergency meeting for my son in year 5 because he'd managed quite well, and the wheels started to fall off, as I call it, and it was very much we can meet emotional need or academic. We're going to struggle to do both in this setting, and so we removed him from mainstream education with a view to finding him a specialist setting, and it has been transformative. But it's a very, very scary thing to do, because you are sort of taking your child out of the traditional education and in what feels like going into the Wild West. So it's helpful to have some guidance, to have a little bit of almost like a roadmap of what you need to do and what it means for your child and for you. Well, thank you both. That's been really, really informative. I think just to kind of do a little bit of a recap, what we're saying here is that the EHCP process is a fairly arduous process. Yeah. It's not for the faint-hearted. You do need to be prepared to advocate for your child and collect evidence. I think it's quite important that we mention as well that EHCPs can travel with your child. So if you were, say, to move from Kent to Greater Manchester, you need to inform the local authority, but your EHCP does travel with you.
It does. It might look different.
Yeah.
they have different templates depending on which local authority you're in, but you are entitled to the same provision that's written on there.
And obviously it's really good to tell your school as well because of the funding side for the local authority.
And the EHCP as well. I think it's important that we remember this is something that is issued because your child is struggling in school. They don't have to have a formal diagnosis, but there does need to be evidence that they're struggling. And this document is a legally binding document, and it will stay with them until they're 25 years old. The importance and gravitas that an EHCP or an educational healthcare plan has and the value it can bring to your child is enormous. But you do need to be prepared to go through a system, to understand a system, and probably to ask for a little bit of help along the way, would you say?
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's so much support out there as well. So don't be afraid to reach out and to ring those helplines or go onto the websites because it is free and it is available.
And there's lots, if you go onto your local authority website, you should be able to find how you can access information on this. Yeah. Thank you very much, Emma and Sarah Jo. It's been amazing to talk to you today, and thank you to the listeners for joining us. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please like and subscribe, and for more information, please visit the Options Autism website.